My boss sent that email to 200 employees on a Friday afternoon, right as everyone was shutting down their laptops for the weekend. In case anyone is wondering how our regional marketing director secures her funding, the company-wide blast read, complete with an attachment of my corporate calendar. Let us just say she spends more time behind closed doors with the CEO than analyzing market data. It is amazing what a pretty face and absolute submission can buy you in corporate America. By Monday morning, he was standing in the lobby with a single cardboard box in his hands, crying in front of the security guards as he begged for his pension back. He thought he had destroyed my dignity with a single press of a button. He thought he was putting a young woman back in her place. What he did not know was that the CEO he accused me of sleeping with was not my secret lover. She was my mother. Follow my story until the end to see how the ultimate workplace bully completely destroyed his own career. And comment below with the city or country you are watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Jasmine. I am 31 years old and I hold a master's degree in marketing analytics from Harvard University. I spent 6 years grinding through 80-hour work weeks at top-tier consulting firms before I ever stepped foot into Vanguard Global Logistics. I was not looking for handouts. I was not looking for shortcuts. I had spent my entire adult life trying to build a career entirely on my own merit, completely independent of my family's massive corporate footprint. When I was hired at Vanguard as the senior regional marketing director, I intentionally kept my maiden name, using my middle name as my legal surname on all human resources paperwork. Vanguard was a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, and its founder and chief executive officer was Dr. Eleanor Vance, a formidable, brilliant woman who had built the empire from the ground up over 40 years. She was also the woman who raised me, taught me how to read financial balance sheets before I was 10, and taught me that a woman power comes from her preparation, not her volume. To protect the integrity of the company and my own professional standing, my mother and I agreed on a strict, unbreakable rule the day I accepted the job offer. In the office, we were strictly executive colleagues. No public warmth, no private favors, no visible relation. Only 3 people in the entire company of 10,000 employees knew the truth: Human Resources Legal Counsel, the board chairman, and myself. For 3 years, I worked under a regional vice president named Richard Sterling. Richard was a 52-year-old corporate dinosaur whose entire management strategy relied on taking credit for his female subordinates' work while making passive-aggressive comments about their appearance. He was loud, deeply insecure, and threatened by anyone who understood modern data analytics better than he did, which was practically everyone in the department. From my very first month at the company, Richard made it his personal mission to undermine me. If I presented a multi-channel campaign that increased client acquisition by 40%, Richard would smile tightly at the head of the conference table and say, "Great execution on my strategy, Jasmine. Now go ahead and order the coffee for the afternoon board session." If I pointed out a critical mathematical error in his quarterly budget projections, he would laugh dismissively in front of the team and say, "Let us not get hysterical over numbers, sweetheart. Leave the big picture math to the men who sign the checks." I did not scream. I did not file petty HR complaints that would be swept under the rug by his cronies. I did what my mother had taught me to do. I kept my head down, documented every single interaction, and let my performance numbers speak so loudly that even his arrogance could not drown them out. By my 3rd year, my team was generating 60% of the company total digital revenue. Meanwhile, Richard Division was bleeding clients due to his outdated strategies and toxic leadership style. The board of directors was taking notice. Unbeknownst to Richard, the board had quietly initiated a structural reorganization, preparing to create a new group vice president of global strategy position, a role that would sit directly above Richard's head. Because of the massive scope of the role, the board requested a comprehensive internal audit of all regional marketing leaders. Every executive candidate was subjected to a blind performance review conducted by an external corporate management firm. I submitted my 300-page strategy portfolio under an anonymous tracking number. Richard submitted his, filled with vague buzzwords, recycled pitch decks, and inflated revenue forecasts that he had stolen from my junior analysts. When the results came back, the external consultants ranked my portfolio number 1 out of 50 global applicants. The board unanimously selected me for the promotion. The formal announcement was scheduled for the annual Q3 Executive Summit, a high-stakes corporate conference held at our downtown headquarters, attended by every regional manager, board member, and major shareholder in the company. My mother, as CEO, was set to personally introduce the new vice president on stage. 2 weeks before the summit, Richard found out through an internal rumor that a new vice president was being appointed, and that he was not the chosen candidate. His fragile ego shattered completely. He could not digest the fact that his authority was being bypassed. Instead of reflecting on his own abysmal performance, his mind immediately jumped to the most toxic, backward explanation his mind could construct. If a 31-year-old woman was moving past him, it could not possibly be because she was smarter or harder working. It had to be corruption. He began stalking my work schedule. He noticed that once or twice a week, after normal business hours when the floors were clear, I would take the private executive elevator up to the penthouse suite. He saw me enter the CEO private office, lock the door, and remain inside for an hour at a time. To anyone with a functioning brain, it was obvious. I was meeting with the chief executive officer to prepare high-level strategic alignment for the upcoming quarterly expansion. But to Richard's warped, desperate mind, he thought he had discovered the ultimate scandal. He assumed I was having a romantic affair with the top executive to secure my career advance. What made his stupidity truly legendary was that he was so blinded by his own misogyny that he never even bothered to look closely at the CEO's full legal name, her family history, or the simple fact that Dr. Eleanor Vance and I shared identical facial structures, identical posture, and identical brown eyes. He saw a powerful older executive and a younger female director, and his brain filled in the nastiest story it could invent. Rather than bringing his findings to human resources or asking for a meeting, Richard decided to execute a public execution. He wanted to destroy me so thoroughly that no company in North America would ever hire me again. On Friday afternoon at 4:45 p.m., right before the corporate servers went into weekend maintenance mode, Richard opened his email client. He drafted a blast email addressing the entire headquarters staff, over 200 executives, department heads, and board members. Attached to the email were stolen security log timestamps showing my late-night visits to the penthouse floor, photos he had secretly taken of me walking into the CEO private suite, and a written manifesto filled with vile, slanderous accusations. Colleagues, the email read, "It is my duty as a senior leader to expose the systemic rot within our marketing division. While hardworking men like myself spend decades building this company, others choose to climb the corporate ladder through the bedroom. Jasmine has been conducting an illicit affair with our chief executive officer behind closed doors to secure an unearned promotion. Attached are the receipts of her nocturnal visits to the executive suite. I demand an immediate ethics investigation before she is allowed to ruin this organization further." He hit send. Within 30 seconds, the entire headquarters erupted into chaos. Phones began ringing across every floor. Text messages flooded internal group chats. I was sitting at my desk finishing a client summary when my screen flashed with the notification. I opened the email. I read every single word. I looked at the attached photos. For a split second, a cold shock ran through my chest. The sheer malice of it was breathtaking. But as I read it a second time, a sound escaped my throat that my cubicle neighbors definitely were not expecting. I did not cry. I did not panic. I did not slam my laptop shut. I burst out laughing. It was not a nervous chuckle. It was a clear, confident laugh that echoed down the quiet hallway. Richard had tried to set a public trap to burn my life to the ground, but in his absolute, arrogant ignorance, he had just handed me the key to his complete and total destruction. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a direct line from the penthouse suite. I picked it up. "Did you read it?" My mother's voice came through the speaker, as calm and sharp as liquid nitrogen. "I read it," I replied, leaning back in my leather chair. "The board chairman is on line too," she said quietly. "He is currently having a near-apoplectic fit." Richard managed to CC 3 major institutional investors on that email thread. "What do you want to do, Dr. Vance?" I asked, maintaining our professional protocol over the corporate line. There was a long, heavy pause on the other end. Then my mother spoke, her tone dripping with the cold authority that had built a corporate empire. "Do not reply to the email. Do not speak to anyone on your floor. Let him celebrate his victory over the weekend. On Monday morning, the annual summit begins at 9 o'clock in the main auditorium. Let him take the stage first." "Understood," I said. Over the weekend, Richard's confidence reached psychotic levels. Through mutual colleagues, I heard he was bragging at a local country club, telling junior partners that he had cleaned up the department and saved Vanguard from a corrupt scandal. He genuinely believed that by Monday morning, I would be suspended, the CEO would be forced into early retirement by the board, and he would be crowned the interim president. Monday morning arrived. The downtown headquarters auditorium was packed to absolute capacity. Over 300 people, executive staff, board members, regional directors, and visiting international shareholders filled the plush velvet seats. The air in the room was thick with tension, whispers, and nervous energy. Everyone was waiting for the fallout from Friday email bomb. Richard sat in the front row, wearing his most expensive navy suit, his chest puffed out, a smug, triumphant smirk plastered across his face. He looked like a man who thought he was about to receive a Medal of Honor. I walked into the auditorium precisely at 8:55 a.m. I was dressed in a sharp, tailored charcoal suit, my hair pulled back in a tight bun, carrying my leather presentation folder. The whispers intensified as I walked down the center aisle. People stared, some looking away in awkward discomfort, others watching with morbid curiosity. I kept my chin up, my gaze steady, and took my seat in the designated executive section near the stage. Richard did not even look at me. He simply chuckled softly to his colleague beside him and shook his head in pity. At 9:00 a.m. sharp, the heavy stage curtains parted. The board chairman, a formidable 70-year-old retired judge named Thomas Sterling, no relation to Richard, walked up to the podium. His face was entirely devoid of emotion. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen," Chairman Sterling's voice boomed over the high-end sound system. "Before we begin our formal quarterly review, we must address an administrative matter regarding corporate governance, professional ethics, and the public email sent late Friday afternoon by Regional Vice President Richard Sterling." A collective gasp ran through the audience. People sat up straight, bracing for the carnage. Richard stood up slightly in his seat, adjusting his jacket, preparing to be called to the stage to receive his accolades. "Mr. Sterling," the chairman said, his eyes locking onto Richard like a hawk targeting prey, "please come to the stage." Richard practically strutted up the wooden steps. He took his place beside the podium, cleared his throat, and took a small step toward the microphone. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know this was a difficult revelation for the board, but as a loyal servant of Vanguard, I could not stand by while our meritocracy was compromised by improper personal relationships." Chairman Sterling looked at Richard for 3 long seconds, with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Sit down in that chair, Richard," the chairman said coldly, pointing to a single wooden chair placed in the center of the illuminated stage. "You are not here to speak. You are here to listen." Richard's smug smile flickered for a fraction of a second, confusion clouding his eyes, but he obeyed, sitting down under the intense glare of the stage spotlights. "Now," Chairman Sterling continued, turning toward the wing of the stage, "I would like to introduce our Chief Executive Officer, Dr. Eleanor Vance." The auditorium went dead silent as my mother stepped out from behind the velvet curtain. She was dressed impeccably, her posture regal, her steps measured. She did not look like a woman embroiled in a corporate scandal. She looked like a commander walking onto a battleground she already owned. She walked up to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and looked out over the sea of 300 employees. On Friday afternoon, Dr. Vance began, her voice steady and echoing clearly through every speaker in the hall. An email was distributed to 200 of our top staff members. That email contained severe allegations of corporate misconduct, sexual favors, and unearned professional advancement involving myself and our senior regional marketing director, Jasmine. She paused, letting the weight of the words settle over the breathless crowd. Richard Sterling accused Director Jasmine of sleeping her way to the top. My mother continued, turning her head slowly to look down at Richard, who was shifting uncomfortably in his chair under the harsh lights. He claimed that her frequent late-night visits to my private office were evidence of an illicit affair. My mother reached into her jacket pocket, pulled out a formal leather folder, and opened it on the podium. What Mr. Sterling failed to do, due to a combination of staggering professional incompetence, lack of basic investigative diligence, and a deeply ingrained, sexist assumption that a successful young woman cannot possess intellect, was verify basic corporate records. She looked directly at Richard. 31 years ago, I gave birth to a daughter named Jasmine Eleanor Vance. For the past 3 years, to preserve complete professional impartiality within this organization, Jasmine worked under her legal middle surname, keeping our familial relationship strictly confidential from general staff, while human resources and the board monitored her performance. A wave of utter, crushing shock ripped through the auditorium. Multiple people gasped out loud. Heads snapped back and forth between my mother on stage and me sitting calmly in the front row. Richard's face went from pale to a sickly, ghost-white shade in less than 2 seconds. His mouth fell open, his eyes widening in pure horror as his brain frantically tried to process the massive, cataclysmic error he had just realized. Jasmine did not need to sleep with the CEO to gain influence in this company. My mother's voice rang out, dropping into a tone of absolute steel. She inherited my work ethic. She earned a master's degree from Harvard, and she built a marketing division that currently carries the financial weight of this entire region, including the massive deficit created by Mr. Sterling's failing department. My mother closed the folder with a sharp, decisive snap that sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. Furthermore, my mother said, gesturing toward the large projection screen behind the stage, the board of directors recently conducted an independent, anonymous audit to select our new group vice president of global strategy. The external agency reviewed 50 global candidates. Option A, submitted by Director Jasmine, scored 98 out of 100 points. Option B, submitted by Richard Sterling, was found to contain 15 pages of plagiarized text stolen directly from his junior analysts, along with fraudulent revenue projections. The giant screen lit up, displaying side-by-side comparisons of Richard's stolen reports against my original data files, complete with red highlight markers showing his blatant plagiarism. The crowd began to murmur in outrage. The prestige Richard had spent 20 years trying to fake was completely dismantled in front of every colleague, peer, and executive he had ever tried to impress. Richard Sterling, Chairman Sterling, stepped back to the microphone, his voice sharp and final. You have engaged in gross professional misconduct, public defamation of an executive officer, corporate libel, and blatant intellectual property theft. You are terminated from Vanguard Global Logistics effective immediately, for cause. The chairman looked toward the back of the auditorium and raised his hand. 2 uniformed corporate security officers immediately marched down the center aisle, their heavy boots echoing on the carpet. They stepped onto the stage, stood on either side of Richard's chair, and pulled him up by his arms. Richard looked completely broken. The arrogance, the smugness, the pompous authority he had wielded like a weapon for years was completely gone. Tears actually welled up in his eyes as he looked out at the 300 colleagues who were now staring at him with pure contempt and disgust. Wait, please, Richard stammered, his voice squeaking as he looked toward my mother and then down at me. Dr. Vance, Jasmine, please, it was a misunderstanding. I was trying to protect the company. I did not know. That is precisely your failure, Richard. I spoke up from my seat, my voice carrying clearly through the front rows. You never bothered to know. You saw my work, and you chose to see a target instead of a leader. My mother did not even give him the dignity of a final glance. She simply turned her back as the security guards escorted him down the stage steps and out through the rear double doors, his head hanging low as he carried his small box of personal desk items out into the street. My mother adjusted her microphone one last time, a rare, genuine smile appearing on her face as her eyes met mine. It is now my absolute privilege, as Chief Executive Officer and as a proud colleague, to introduce our new Group Vice President of Global Strategy, Jasmine Vance. The entire auditorium erupted into a standing ovation. 300 people stood to their feet, clapping and cheering as I walked up the stage steps, took my place at the podium, and shook hands with the board. In the weeks that followed, Richard tried desperately to minimize the damage. He attempted to hire a labor attorney to sue Vanguard for wrongful termination, but once our legal team presented the defamation evidence, the plagiarism audit, and the formal company-wide email blast, his own lawyer dropped him as a client to avoid court sanctions. Because he was terminated for cause involving gross misconduct and fraud, his multi-million-dollar severance package was completely voided, and his corporate pension was frozen pending civil litigation for the damages his email caused to our institutional investor relations. Last I heard through industry contacts, Richard was forced to sell his luxury suburban home and move out of the state. His reputation in corporate logistics is so thoroughly destroyed that no major firm will allow him within 50 feet of an executive management position. He is currently working as a low-level independent contractor, doing basic data entry from a small rented apartment. Meanwhile, under my leadership as vice president, Vanguard Global Strategy has posted its highest quarterly profit margins in the history of the company. My team operates in an environment built on absolute transparency, intellectual rigor, and mutual respect, where performance is measured by data and hard work, not by fragile egos or toxic office politics. I learned that when people try to use your quiet nature to build a floor for their own ego, you do not need to roll down into the mud to fight them. You simply let them build their trap, step back, and watch them fall inside. Now, I am curious about those of you who listen to my story. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have confronted him the moment he sent that email, or would you have waited for the public board meeting to deliver the final blow? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to state the city or country you are watching from so I can see how far our story has reached. Thank you for watching until the very end.